Welcome to Independent Thought and Freedom, Episode 6. My guest today is the academically controversial Michael Rectenwald, the anti-PC prof. Michael Rectenwald is a professor of liberal studies at New York University, where he has taught cultural and social history, as well as academic writing, since 2008. He's the author of 8 books, including Springtime for Snowflakes, Social Justice and Its Postmodern Parentage, 19th Century British Secularism, Science, Religion and Literature, Academic Writing, Real-World Topics, and Global Secularisms in a Post-Secular Age. His academic essays have appeared in the British Journal for the History of Science, Endeavour, and the Cambridge University Press anthology, George Eliot in Context, among others. Michael is a prominent spokesperson for academic freedom and free speech, and an expert on the history and character of the social justice movement. He has published articles and essays on these topics in several periodicals and news outlets, and has appeared regularly on national television in the US, including on The O'Reilly Factor, Tucker Carlson Tonight, Fox and Friends, and many others. He's also appeared on numerous radio and popular internet shows. He holds a PhD in literary and cultural studies from Carnegie Mellon University, a master's in English literature from Case Western Reserve University, and a BA in English literature from the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome to the podcast, Mike, Professor Rectenwald.
No, just call me Michael. Thanks for having me, Kurt.
Hey, it's great to have you here. I want to start off with just a sort of icebreaking question. Who has given you the greatest inspiration and earned your highest admiration?
Historical or contemporary?
Both.
Both. I'm going to say probably my highest admiration is for somebody like Friedrich Nietzsche, I guess, because of his independence of thought and his not necessarily for every view that he expressed, but rather that the way that he stands out as a singular individual in the midst of this moment of collectivization, which was really taking over at his time.
That's amazing. He's definitely up there for me. I have an immense admiration for him. So that's good to hear that we share that in common.
Yeah.
I love his stuff. So let's start off by asking, what is, and I'll ask it from a kind of normie perspective. Let me put it that way. What is your problem with political correctness? I mean, isn't this just a way to dismiss the idea of being sensitive to others who have had a hard time in the mainstream system? I mean, what's your motivation? Why does it bother you so much?
Well, let me just read you something that I just wrote this morning. And it talks about why social justice ideology is a problem and why political correctness, to enforce it is an issue. And I said this morning, what does it mean to have a social justice university as opposed to a truth university? It means that facts that offend feelings will be jettisoned. It means that many lines of investigation, anything deemed sexist, racist, transphobic, colonialist, imperialist, or whatever other epithet they can be tarred with, will be foreclosed in advance, no matter their potential contribution to our knowledge base. It means that the anti-empirical, anti-objective, hyper-subjective, philosophically idealist, and absolute relativist epistemologies of postmodern theories will persist and spread to more fields beyond the humanities and social sciences, where they already dominate, to threaten the STEM fields, where their effects would not only be devastating for science, but potentially life-threatening as well. It means that our criteria for truth and for reality itself will erode, continuously making fake news a quaint problem as compared to fake history, fake science, and fake reality. So that's my problem with it.
Yeah, it's you basically see it as a as harmful to truth, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in curtailing of intellectual avenues of inquiry, I'm basically a civil and cultural libertarian. It's an infringement. It's a set of infringements, and it's a prohibitionist movement. Prohibitionist as against the particular modes of speaking, statements that one can make. It pretends to control thinking by virtue of controlling speech, and thereby limiting my and other people's individual rights. Right. It's an infringement upon my rights.
And I mean, as a university educator, how do you see, and I guess linking up to some listeners who would be in university or themselves, I mean, how do you see this harming young people and their education?
Well, what's happened is, there's a kind of, I would call it a sort of flaccid sort of mentality that permeates the student body based on this lack of kind of like rigorous investigation, rigorous thought, and in favor of basically anything goes, feeling based assertions, and really lack of inquiry, a lack of a methodology, and a lack of mental discipline that's required to pursue anything really seriously, whether it be in the sciences, humanities, or social sciences. So I see it as, and in place of all those, in place of that, what you have is people just learning how to mouth the right types of shibboleths and so forth, so that they just become more or less phrase repeaters, phrasemongers, and Paul parrots of a kind of sophisticated type, where they are basically able to string together a concatenation of social justice inflected virtue signaling phraseologies. This is really what's becoming of the student body as I see it.
Yeah. I mean, and when you put it in that way too, I think, myself coming from a university background as well, it's not only about the ideology, it's almost like a philosophy of what the university is supposed to be, because right. A lot of people go to university because they want to get a job, and it's like, whether it be politics or whatever discipline they want to get into, economics, mm-hmm. or even science or whatever, they think it's the job to memorize the textbook, right? Mm-hmm. and this just becomes the political textbook or the ethical textbook. Now right. we're kind of getting into the moral textbook. They're telling you everything, right. How to think, right? But yes. But it kind of ultimately boils down to, is a university a place to think and challenge ideas and to push knowledge forward, or is it a place to get a degree so you can get a job? And people kind of come in with this idea, of a photocopier mentality, and it's kind of like invaded the moral field.
I think that's true, and the nexus between this careerist approach to the university and the social justice pablum that they're expected to regurgitate or imbibe and regurgitate really is that it is a form of conformity, which creates a kind of chilling effect, and with people having as their ultimate objective getting some sort of a career, a job, of course, the imperative to follow and stay in line in terms of the social justice dicta is very strong, because they fear that their future is at stake if they don't. And they have good reason to fear that, because it will be at stake.
Yeah. I mean, because it's really a very dangerous extension of that conformity
mm-hmm.
idea.
Yeah. So it connects to the whole, careerist, utilitarian side of what people have criticized universities in terms of in that way, because it's a form of because people are in a very precarious situation as young students. The professoriate yields a great deal of power over them, in terms of ideological conformity. And since they are, in fact, the professoriate is holding their futures in their hands, and the students' futures in their hands, the students are careful to parrot back what the faculty want to hear.
Yeah.
And the faculty are telling them what to say.
Yeah. And what to think and what to feel. It can be worse,
Yes.
I mean, how to think, in fact, I
don't even think it's thinking. I maintain that it's not really thinking, because it is a form of rehearsal of a kind of, more or less fluid sounding phrases. For example, if you put together the right types of statements, this is heteronormative, imperialist, colonialist, and and you put these words together in the right order, make it sound good. It's just good sounding, but it isn't really good thinking at all.
That's right.
They haven't investigated anything. It's just the results are already there. They already know what they're supposed to find in advance.
Yeah. It's like what is it called? Those groups. It was a group of humanities scholars. It was like the so-called hoax in the 1990s, and they just did like 20 papers, and they just put the right phrases together and got a whole bunch of publications spewing nonsense, but they just said,
right.
Wait.
Yes, that's right. That's Helen Pluckrose, Peter Boghossian, and the third name escapes me. And right now, Peter Boghossian at Portland State University is in hot water because he's being called before an ethics committee for participating in this extended hoax, because they are basically, the university, instead of pursuing the line of inquiry that this has opened up, like the question about what a faux paradigm this is for scholarship. Instead, they're just doubling down and covering, and now just.
And I'm punishing you for exposing them. You know what I mean?
Exactly. The whistleblowers are being exposed. They're being punished. That's all.
Yeah. It's really Orwellian, isn't it? I mean.
Yes. And I've been referred to as a philosophical whistleblower, which I think is the best phrase, best short phrase for what I'm doing.
Yeah. Just to kind of continue off on this idea about what it's doing to young people and the way they thought. Do you personally see it having a gender differential? In other words, more particularly, do you think it hurts young men more than it affects young women?
Yes,
I do myself. And please tell me why you think so.
Well, just beginning with the rape culture meme, and the idea that anything that a woman says that a young man's done, he is guilty until proven innocent. And this has taken over the university culture and it is making it a very treacherous place for young men to be. To have any sort of sexual expression is extremely, extremely dangerous. That's just for starters. It's also made them, basically, it's disqualified their views in advance based on their subject position, as it were, because social justice ideology has adopted what is called standpoint epistemology, and that means whatever your subject position or your personal social standpoint is, that dictates what truth you might be able to know.
Yeah.
And since you're a white male, for example, or a male in general, you're already invalidated because you don't have access to the truths that the subordinated are privy to. Therefore, basically, everything you have to say is invalid. And what you hear going on is, oftentimes these caveats or these sort of disclaimers in advance when a young male student begins to speak. I know I'm just a male. I know I'm a white male. I know I'm a privileged, but so they have to frame everything they say with an apology up front.
That's terrible. I mean, what that does to your psyche and spirit and soul, it's really like, an oppressive communist system, a
Yeah.
totalitarian system. I mean, it's really incredible. Do you
And then
remember the
they,
Twilight Zone show with this little boy who had these special powers and told everyone to think happy thoughts all the time? Do you know that episode?
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's at that time it was directed towards the right, but it is perfectly, illustrative
Yeah.
of the left these days, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, and the interesting thing is, despite the fact that the leftists are the authoritarians today,
Hmm.
I've been trying to do some research on leftist authoritarianism for my next book project. And there's nothing there. I mean, you have to go to this, basically dig into Soviet and Chinese cultural
Yeah.
historical records, but there they won't even acknowledge in the university. I'm talking about academic writing,
Yeah.
academic research,
Because
right?
there's that book Liberal Fascism by, I can't remember, some conservative commentator. I can't remember the
Yeah,
name offhand.
they won't acknowledge that this is leftist, that this is leftist totalitarianism or leftist authoritarianism. So there's a phenomenon known as right-wing authoritarianism. It's been very well studied and documented, and there are these numerous indices for studying it. Yet there's maybe 2 or 3 papers I could find for left-wing authoritarianism, and of those 2 or 3 papers, only one indicates the possibility that it exists, and it also admits that there's not even been a measurement system for detecting and measuring left-wing authoritarianism. So there's not only this culture in the classroom. We're talking about a deep black hole in the scholarship about this very phenomenon. So
Yeah.
you can't even study it because you can't study it because there are no studies to build on. It's very difficult. I'm trying to do research and I'm trying to erect the architecture of, you have to ground your claims in some foundations, right?
Yeah.
Previous findings, previously well-established argumentation, historical records. I'm trying to ground research in nothing because there's nobody there.
Yeah.
YouTube has more on this stuff than the university library systems.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds very, to me, like what you'd have to ground it in is, the Cultural Revolution in China.
Right. That's what I do.
Yeah, or like Orwellian, or 1984, the novel. Because
right.
It's sort of like a real life actualization of.
But look for research or look for anything, even commentary, an academic commentary about the phenomenon, and you won't find it. You can find things on, of course, in journalism and, as you said, right-leaning commentary, and so forth and so on. But you know how it is. If you're trying to establish claims that will withstand scrutiny, you like to build on some peer-reviewed research, not just opinions.
Absolutely. I know it's a huge problem, but you mentioned these groups, and you have some amazing stories. I've seen you and heard you on other interviews and programs about persecution by these Orwellian type cultural revolution type groups, these funny sounding names. I mean, you could, like, there was one committee for inclusion that was excluding.
It's called the Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which I've dubbed the Committee for Conformity, Inequity, and Exclusion.
Yeah.
Because everything they do has to do with conformity, and I didn't conform, so therefore I was treated inequitably, and also they attempted to, and are still attempting to, exclude me from the university.
And I just find it so amazing. I mean, this is like straight, it's like a parody of 1984, like war is peace, ignorance is ignorance is strength. It was ignorance is strength.
Yes, and then they said I was in civil. Yet, in a series of blistering emails from this crowd, I was called everything you can imagine. And they were using like all caps, calling me all these silly names out of the blue with no connection to any evidence and totally incivil. Like, oh, I never even spoke about any of these people by name or individually or even groups. You know, I wasn't even talking about them. They didn't even realize I was talking. I did use the phrase social justice warriors.
Yeah.
And they took it personally and then attacked me like outrageously. They accused me of doing to them what they were doing to me, which is exactly their modus operandus.
Exactly, just projection, and it's just name calling. I was looking at the NYU student paper. I can't remember the name.
Yeah, the Washington Square News. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like it's just a string of names, homophobic, transphobic, blah
right.
blah.
That's what they're being
racist,
taught.
Misogynist. Yeah, and I mean it's just like it's a whole string of parroted words that they ritualistically hurl at you, and it's like, so you must be like a Nazi, a hater of women. I don't know. I'm
glad you used the word ritual, because it brings to mind the point that I also would like to make, is that social justice ideology is a religion. It's a religion because it is based on beliefs that are not empirically established or substantiated in any regard, even though they're made as literally claims in a knowledge community, which is really what's troubling. But also it's ritualistic in the way that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Based on these rituals of condemnation, call-out culture. It borrows from the Chinese Cultural Revolution, those elements called struggle sessions and auto-critique.
And I mean, like in 1984, you had Hate Week with these officially approved hate figures, right? So that, so all the pent up rage that you couldn't express toward authority, you have these officially sanctioned figures of hate now. So they can, so all their hatred for daddy or the administration or whoever, now they can just project it senselessly on you because you're the official.
You become the official hate object, and it's really wild. And it's, as you say, what it does is it's very much herd mentality, of course, right?
Yeah.
So which is why I like through all of this, the writings of Nietzsche have been very. I don't want to say consoled me. They have fortified me, because I realize I'm dealing with herds, a herd mentality.
Any particular work? I love his work. I'd like to know.
Oh, I mean, Genealogy of Morals, Beyond Good and Evil, and read properly the Notebook's Will to Power.
It took me a while to get to appreciate Zarathustra. Although a lot of people that's their go-to book, and I didn't really. It was a dramatic reading of it once that really made me understand.
Maybe that would work for me, but it hasn't. That book hasn't really. I've looked at it. It hasn't. I haven't finished it. It never did anything for me.
That's right. It did not do it to me until I heard a dramatic reading of it. And then I really understood the power. It's really poetic,
Yeah, it's a beautiful. He was a master of prose and prose stylist of the highest order. Yeah. Besides being a very, very, very brilliant and penetrating thinker, Yeah.
I mean, I wish I read and understood German because the good translations capture the humor and the irony in so much of his aphorisms and so.
Oh, the irony is
what it is in German.
The thing is that his writing is drenched in irony. That it is so the wit involved is so penetrating and the irony is so it's doubled and tripled over.
Exactly. Which I know is impossible to translate because he's obviously playing on double, triple meanings of words and stuff like that.
I had to learn to read German for 2 languages for my PhD, so I did learn to read German. So I have read them in the German.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. So you have a greater appreciation. Yeah, I mean, it's just one thing I find amazing is just the lack of self-awareness of these people.
Oh, absolutely.
On a sort of parallel note, I don't know how much you're into popular music and stuff like that, but if you remember when the movie Spinal Tap came out, right, and it parodied all the kind of rock, stuff, and then like a couple of years later, U2 did Rattle and Hum. And it was almost exactly like Spinal Tap. Like they went to Elvis's grave and sat on his motorcycle, and it was like, and I was like, didn't you guys see Spinal Tap 2 years ago?
Yeah, right. It's like, didn't you people read 1984?
Exactly.
Don't you know anything about the Cultural Revolution in China?
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, what you'll find is, surprisingly, a lot of Maoists out there, amongst these people.
Yeah.
And they don't realize also that a lot of the leftist vocabulary and ideas really came from Maoism in '68, and were transferred into the West through feminism and etc. in France. And
also, the Black Panthers were important in bringing Maoism. That's another sort of link that's often overlooked. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Very good.
I had to laugh. I mean, I have to laugh at some of the absurdity. I can't believe it's real. I honestly, when I hear you speaking about this thing, I just cannot believe it's real, because it's been like a long time since I've been in that environment. And you talk about this tunnels of oppression. Just explain that, please. Explain that to me.
Right. These are orientation. When you have first year orientation, it used to be called freshman, but you're not allowed to say freshman anymore.
And that itself is just it's like the introduction that you can't say freshman anymore, right?
Right. So first year orientation. They put these students through what they call a tunnel of oppression. And what it is they have to run through like this gauntlet, really. They're running a gauntlet. And during this running of the gauntlet, they're being pelted with racist epithets.
By whom? By whom? Who is
they allow people of color to do this to them.
Oh my God.
Okay. In fact, this is required orientation activity.
Sounds like a Mike Judge movie or something.
And so, they'll have African American and other minority students screaming at them like all kinds of names.
So would they, so they'd be cursing using white racial epithets at white people?
Yes, and this is authorized by the university.
How did this even start? Who thought this was a good idea?
They have just kept extending. That comes straight out of Maoism, out of struggle sessions.
Yeah.
And they've just adopted these techniques without knowing what they are, unless they just don't care. Because that's exactly the kind of thing they would do to the individual in Maoism.
Yes.
Scream at them and yell at them and even beat them. But this even looks physical at times, because they're up in the faces of these kids. At the end of the tunnel, there's people like towering over them, screaming down at them. And it's spooky.
It is, because I can imagine the rage that is engendered and encouraged and provoked by this type of thing. So they're encouraging, black people to abuse white people, basically.
Right.
I honestly it's hard to believe that this is actually happening.
Yeah, if you don't believe it, look, just Google it and you'll look at, for example, I'm looking right now at Boise State University. Tunnel of oppression.
Oh my God. You know what it sounds like to me? It sounds like a perverse black nationalist, like Eldridge Cleaver or something, right?
Yeah.
He used to talk about, revolutionary rape of white women, and he'd practice on black women first. He talked about that in Soul on Ice, right? And I mean, and it's like, they're just trying to make gullible liberals do these things, and they're like laughing in the background. I can imagine them snickering, saying, "Look at what they're doing! I can't believe they're letting us call them that."
Like this is all over the place. And if you think this is just on the West Coast or the East Coast, This is happening all over. I'm looking now at the Wichita State University, where they have these students go through these tunnels to make them know what it feels like to be a racial minority and to feel the kinds of oppression they face daily. So what they do is just try to simulate racial hatred.
And it's so do you remember that Saturday Night Live skit around 1981 when Eddie Murphy made himself up as a white man?
Yeah.
Right. And it was this kind of black fantasy of what white life was like when blacks weren't around. It's like when the last black person left the bus, hey, he's gone, and then they have a
right.
It's like this they're projecting all these fantasies of what racial oppression is or what privilege is, and it is based on nothing in reality. They're allowing the most sort of twisted, perverted interpretation of reality and validating that. It's just like when someone identified as, I heard you talking about Google, somebody's identifying as a wingless yellow dragonfly, and you're supposed to take that seriously.
This is at Google. This is a major corporation in the United States, one of the biggest in the world. And there's a person there, and this is in James Damore's lawsuit, if you want to look at it, who identifies as a yellow wingless dragonfly kin and a large ornate building.
So the person has two identifications.
No, that's their identity.
But it's two different people?
No, it's the same person.
Oh my God. You can't make this up.
No, you can't make it up. It's beyond belief. And then for suggesting that there was a difference between men and women that might affect their career ambitions, James Damore was summarily fired. But this person who says they are a yellow wingless dragonfly kin and a large ornate building is still there, no doubt, and probably promoted.
Yeah, I mean, it is frightening to hear about this kind of stuff, and now I was thinking about Camille Paglia, because a lot of this, she's
a hero of mine. She's a definite hero of mine.
Oh God, I love her. I really do. She, and when she came out in the 90s with her Salon column when the internet was just starting up, that really helped me throughout my PhD and stuff. I used to read her religiously, and I used to worship Foucault at a certain point in the 80s.
Sure, I mean, Foucault of all the postmodern theorists, he's the least objectionable in a way.
Yeah. And she hated him. She could not stand him. And I always found that unfortunate because I had liked both of them. But I've come totally on her side now. And one thing she pointed out that really, really got me on her side was she pointed out Foucault's total ignorance on serious scholarship about ancient Greece. And then his whole history of sexuality about ancient Greece and of the self and all that. It was based on absolutely nothing.
This is true, and it's partly there is some culpability there to lay at the feet of the French academic system and actually the library system. As I understand it, you can't just browse through the library at a French university. You have to have the books brought to you all the time. Right. So a lot of the times what I've understood is a lot of so-called French scholars just know the names of the books and they make up what they think might be in there.
Right.
And then, of course, Foucault admitted that, he said, at least 15% of postmodern theoretical writing is absolutely senseless and purposefully so.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I actually found some of that attractive in the 80s and 90s.
Sure.
Because their initial target was the left, right? Because Foucault, was a student of Althusser, right? So they were, and the communists and Marxists hated the postmodernists, if you remember.
Sure, they still do.
Yeah,
Some of them.
Jameson, and yeah, remember when Jameson came out with his stuff against postmodernists, and
yeah, this is what people like, Jordan Peterson don't know, and they keep equating Marxism and postmodernism, and they think
right.
they call it neo-Marxism and it's cultural Marxism. No,
that's right.
That's errant. That's utterly mistaken.
Yeah, because the Marxists, saw them as reactionaries, sort of
reactionaries, and they hated their objectivity and subjectivist epistemological.
That's what SoCal was all about, right? That's
exactly.
That's what the hoax was all about.
They hated that because that undermines the basis for objective history and class history, is of course, because it undermines social reality, which if nothing else, you could say Marxists are social realists, right?
Exactly. And this is an interesting thing because I believe they've totally misread Nietzsche.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah, totally.
Especially Foucault, who totally inverted the entire point.
Absolutely. But in their misreading of Nietzsche, they've kind of gone from Marx to Nietzsche, because it's like, so now they've abandoned the working class because that project failed, and then they've now adopted transgender children or whatever the next thing is. But
right.
But it's and so it just becomes nothing but power struggles among groups based on nothing.
That's right. Well, Nietzsche made an interesting argument that truth basically consisted of the statements made by those as powerful enough to enforce them, in effect. Now, what Foucault did is turned that into a negative, and said that's what all institutions and so forth and the powerful were doing. And then instead of, Nietzsche was actually championing that idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Foucault turned it into a resentment. Okay.
Yeah.
So he took the resentment side of that particular framing, and tried to create a whole discourse for opposing the power structures and the way that power and knowledge were connected.
I mean, and over your lifetime, so you would have seen this transformation in the left,
yes,
in the university itself. Yeah. I mean, and I know I've come to my conclusion about certain things, but I'd like to hear about you, like about the university system itself.
Well, let's start with just the left and its transformation. I was a student of Allen Ginsberg's when I was 19.
Okay.
So I had
when you say a student at university, or like,
I was an apprentice actually. I had an apprenticeship situation where I was literally enrolled in a class in which was called Ginsberg Apprenticeship. And I was the only apprentice for that semester.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had intimate familiarity with the new left, and some of the cultural figures there, because I met them through him, but also I had known some of them before. So one of the things I would say is what we've seen is from that period to now is a transformation of the left from libertarian to authoritarian.
Right.
And that's a very significant one.
It is. The idea of liberation seems to have totally gone from the left.
It's gone. Liberation is now liberation by social justice warriors of people they believe to be in some sort of oppressive cage. Yeah. But it is not the liberation of the person at all. Nobody is individually liberated. So, and my argument is very close to John Stuart Mill's along this line. If you can't liberate people in groups, because the ultimate liberation is obviously individual, and if you are not individually liberated, then there's no liberation at all.
And I don't think somebody can liberate somebody else. You have to liberate.
That's right. You can't do it by proxy. You can't be someone else's liberator. And in fact, the main thing is because they have to express their freedom on their own.
Yeah. So it's like, so in a sense, they've definitely taken that Foucauldian postmodern thing, specifically Foucault, where he said there's no such thing as liberation.
That's right.
Yeah. We're always in some cage or other.
What he was suggesting was that, in fact, the whole idea of liberation was part of the trap set by power itself. And so liberating the subject, the whole ideology of liberating the subject was part and parcel of a system that produces the subject
exactly
as such in the first place.
And thereby imprisons you in another discourse.
That's right.
That we are constantly imprisoned by discourse.
So what he ends up with at the very end, when he does the history of sexuality, part 3, really he ends up this basically all you can do is get into a discourse cage that suits you.
That's exactly right. And you know, if you were to speak to a social justice warrior about that, they wouldn't know. Because
they don't know anything. They don't. Very few of them know anything about the roots of what's driving their movement. They don't know that, in fact, there was an earlier social justice. There have been many earlier social justice movements.
That's right.
And they're very different from this one because this one has adopted things like postmodern theory and postmodern theoretical premises and other and Maoist techniques and so forth. That were not part of earlier social justice. Earlier, the first social justice was invented by a Catholic, a Jesuit priest, Luigi Tapparelli, in 1841 to 1843, introduced the notion of social justice, which was not a redistributive system of wealth redistribution or liberation of repressed communities. It was about how do you redress the problems of immiseration based on the new industrial revolution, and it was about basically social justice was a system of charity. That's all.
I myself was profoundly shaped by liberation theology in the 1980s, and it was about and the idea was if Jesus were around today, he'd be a revolutionary.
See, even that is even the way the Catholics took Luigi Tapparelli's idea, they distorted it too.
Yeah.
Before it got exported out of Catholicism, he was not even a liberation theologist at all. He believed that hierarchy and rank and inequality were absolutely not only natural but utterly ineradicable.
Right. Yeah. And good, I suppose, in a way.
In a way, good because that was how order was maintained, and without it, you'll have no order.
What is so amazing, in the academy, you can't say that. You can't say hierarchy is good.
No, you can't say that at all. Yeah. Any kind of hierarchical idea is rejected in advance.
Exactly, and this is a religious type of thinking you're talking about, right? And also something like teleology, which is so crucial to Aristotelian modes of thinking, and I think it is the only way out of the whole trap that the left wing, that the current social justice thing had. You have to go back to Aristotle and Plato, in my view. I really take Alan Bloom. I think Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind still is...
It's a very good book. It's very prescient. In fact, it was so true. It's more true now than it was then.
Yeah. And the whole, I mean, when it gets down to it, I've not heard anybody really say this in their discussion. They all take as critique, which is excellent. But at the base of his critique is that the break that happened is when the academy stopped talking about the human soul, and that is the beginning of modernism, and that is a difference between ancient thought and ancient and medieval thought and modern thought, and that is a fundamental difference. We are not allowed to talk about the soul. Imagine you talk about poetry and you cannot talk about the soul. I mean, that is amazing.
Yes. So that's of course based on materialism, philosophical materialism, which really means once you get to that point, the problem now is that you have no basis for grounding any morality.
Exactly. And that's what Nietzsche directed himself his whole life.
That's all. He knew it. Yeah. And he realized it, and this is what led to nihilism first, But of course, as you know, but very few people know about Nietzsche, is that he didn't stay in nihilism. That was for the wimp. Nihilism's for the wimp.
That's right. Nietzsche just was the analyst of the nihilism all around him.
Exactly.
That he saw was only going to grow and get worse.
Of course, the answer for that, which was only available to some, is the transvaluation of all values.
Right.
So to produce one's own values, I don't agree with that. I don't read Nietzsche because I'm a Nietzschean. I read him as an antidote to the garbage that we're surrounded with. It's a necessary antidote to the poison that we're subjected to on a regular basis.
So let me ask you something. Would you say you have gone to the right or not?
I don't know. I've tried to put it this way. I think I've transcended the left.
Right.
I don't have a conservative I don't have a conservative mentality. I've never been conservative. I can't consider myself conservative. People call me that, and they've called me everything. I've been called alt-right. I've been called Nazi, because I'm not in the social justice peg.
Yeah, it's so weird today because imagine someone like Milo Yiannopoulos is called a conservative. Like, you know what I mean? He's a flamboyant homosexual.
I know, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So I think the only thing I would say that makes sense about my politics that translates into, the objective realm is that I would call myself a civil and cultural libertarian.
Right.
And that, in a way, of course, it goes against leftism, of contemporary leftism, of course. But also, it does buck against conservatism in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I ditched that left-right thing a while ago. But Camille Paglia was really important for me in the 90s when I used to think of myself as being a free thinker. But I didn't realize where my barrier was. I would not go to the right at all. And so my free thinking would range from anarchism to mainstream leftism to
right.
And stuff like that. And then I would see she would be saying she agrees with this Republican or something, and I couldn't believe it first,
Yeah.
And I just found that that type
she ranges where she really allows herself to range wherever she'll go.
Yeah.
And she doesn't put herself in a kind of corral, she's not putting up a fence around her sort of grazing area. She'll allow herself to go wherever she will. Now, she doesn't accept everything, but she allows herself to roam, and then she'll find things wherever she finds them.
And it's amazing. Way in the 90s, she's talking about being a fascist, and now she loves Mussolini and all this kind of stuff.
I mean, the main thing is her critique of feminism, contemporary feminism, which, is devastating, I think.
Yeah. I mean, she's like, Milo is like an incarnation of her in a certain way because she being a bisexual, I guess she's identifying more as a lesbian now, I'm not sure, but she called herself, she had a male rapist brain in a female body. That's what she said. Or a male homosexual rapist brain, something like that, in a female body.
I would call hers a muscular feminism in the sense that what she's advocating is that feminism isn't about being the victim all the time of men. It is about being a strong person as a woman.
Yeah.
And that means not that men can't do. You have agency, that you're not always the object of people's oppression or acts against you, that you yourself are assertive, that you have agency and that you own it. And also that also makes you, so under contemporary feminism, women can do no wrong. With Camille Paglia, you have responsibility as well as an agent.
That's right.
But they disavow agency. And I think Christina Hoff Sommers has a good phrase for it. They embrace a fainting couch feminism.
Right. Yeah.
It's just
damsel in
like a
distress.
Victorian, like,
Yeah, oh my word, I've been so offended.
yes, everything is they're so dainty, you know, in an intellectual sense, intellectual daintiness, we might call it.
And it's so weird because you know, they'll say the most offensive and gross and vile things, and then
At you, oh yeah, they'll say
yeah,
anything like, "I would like to." Who was that professor at Georgetown who basically said that the people, the Republican congressmen or senators that are supporting the Kavanaugh candidacy for judge should have their testicles or their testicles or genitalia should be cut off and fed to pigs.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what, yeah, I remember. Yeah, and it's so weird because they'll be like pro pornography and pro sex, and yet they're so prudish about
Totally
consent,
prudish.
right?
It's okay for them to have sexual desires, but if you're not one of them, you can't have any sexual desires.
Yeah.
So interestingly, they want to only be predators, but they want to peg themselves as prey.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they have these weird kind of I don't know, schizophrenia. It's like they're so much against cigarette smoking, but totally for weed. It's like
yes, and it's very much like that. And the predation is fine on their part, but interestingly enough, they figure their ideal as being predatory, and yet they keep couching their situation in terms of being a prey.
yeah,
That's very curious.
it's this really weird sort of psychological zone they have themselves.
Yeah, it's like they say, you know, it's fine. You know, they talked about, I forget which woman on Twitter tweeted something about how men ought to be objectified like this, you know, like some woman was objectified, but we should start objectifying men. So, you know, they don't make any sense. Obviously, that's no symmetry.
I think, you know, Orwell, you know, his Doublethink, you know, really captured it so well. I guess it existed in the Soviet Union or something. I'm not, because maybe he saw it in Spain when he was in the Civil War. I'm not.
Soviet Union, I think, is the main model there.
Yeah. And, you know, it was supposed to be a warning, and it's like it's like a recipe book for them.
They think it's Saul Alinsky's rule for radicals. I mean, rather than, you know, a kind of admonition against, you know, what not to turn into or fall prey to.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just incredible. So, it's really hard to get through, you know. So, to these people, it's very hard to get through. And I know we're going to be ending in a few minutes, but I just want to get at some of the possibilities of the ways we might get through with them.
Yeah. I mean, so tell me. I mean, because, you know, let's say for a young male, you know, who normally would have wanted to go to university. I mean, I don't know. Would you recommend that? Would you recommend it at all? What alternatives?
No, I would not right now. No, I would not recommend it. In fact, my youngest son, I did not go to university, and I'm so relieved because I would have to be undertaking all this deprogramming, you know, with him, which I would have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for. So basically, and for a place like NYU at $75,000 a year, you're paying $300,000 to maybe get a career, but definitely get indoctrinated into, programmed into a religious cult.
And indebted, infantilized.
Yes.
You know, you lose your masculinity. You lose.
Well, masculinity is something that's, you know, as bad, period. So they have to shed it, you know, because masculinity is just evil, right?
Exactly.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah, but
just to counter that, at one point I bought a website, a URL called "Toxic Masculinity Built the World."
Yeah, so I mean, I can see how you loved being a troll.
I have to, because that's the only way to get through to them. They're so
and as
dead.
Nietzsche said, laughter
Yes.
shows the balanced mind.
Yes, and I think that's that's the other thing. Milo Yiannopoulos says laughter and war, and I agree with him. And I do want to mention something in connection with him. I'm very saddened by the way he's been depersoned and disappeared.
Yeah,
and they've justified it on the basis that he had nothing to say. They must not have listened to him very closely because he's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I know him personally now.
Well, I think they used the his discussion. I think it was on Joe Rogan when he's
on Rogan.
And when he spoke about him being a victim.
Yeah,
and they were saying,
talking about himself.
Yes, and they're saying he was justifying predators.
Right. Meanwhile, he was a victim of a predator, of a pedophile.
It's just a whole phony, fake excuse to deperson.
But I want to say that if it could happen to him, it could happen to any of us at any time. That's the thing. So they came for Milo, and if I was silent, the phrase, the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to be silent about this, and I'm not going to stop standing up for him.
So
and others that they try to disappear, and also they're disappearing them using some of the people supposedly on the side of free speech.
Exactly.
That's curious.
Because they're making people scared.
They're scaring them, and so they're making people disavow.
That's right. Disavow, rat on your friends.
This is a very Soviet technique. It's like
absolutely.
Get
apologies. I apologize. It's
one way to stay safe from these monsters is to point your fingers at somebody else.
Yeah,
and
that's never going to make you safe.
It's not. That's what they don't get, and they think that you have to apologize and back down and conciliate and so forth, and that's the exact wrong approach.
Right, because then you just become it's a predator-prey relationship, because then they'll just abuse. It's like the abuser and abused relationship.
That's right. If you show that you're bleeding, that's when they come for the kill.
Oh yeah, all their senses are up. They smell blood. They're just gonna come at you.
So this is why, for example, I've been critical of Heterodox Academy. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It's founded by Jonathan Haidt. He's actually at NYU, and I've met him and talked to him. We're not very close, but put it that way. To me, it's this thing where they're trying to promote heterodoxy of thinking in the academy as opposed to the domination of social justice. But what it's turning out to be is just another gatekeeper.
Yeah.
Saying that, we don't want social justice to dominate, but then again, this, and this is not allowed.
Exactly.
So they're
apologetic.
It's apologetic, and it's a subtle form of authoritarianism on its own. And it may be worse than the other form because it's pretending to be anti-authoritarian.
That's right. It's internalized. They're self-policing.
That's right. Worse. That's exactly. So, for example, you did a study of, no platforming of Republican speakers or right-wing speakers on campuses, and he didn't count Milo because Milo, he said, shouldn't have been invited in the first place. So the deplatforming of Milo was not counted in statistics because Milo had no right to speak anyway.
Oh my God! I mean yeah, it's a real Soviet unpersoning. Like they'll wipe out his birth records and all kind of stuff. Just like
I'm not going to let it happen. I think first of all, I've met him. He's a funny, magnetic, charismatic, and very, very charming guy.
Yeah. I'd love to have him on my podcast.
I can make that happen.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me ask you something. As I don't want to keep you over the time. I mean, I want to, but courtesy, I don't want to.
Okay.
Do you see yourself finished with academia? Like after your contract? No. I think it ends in 2020.
I'll remain, at the least, a vocal, engaged critic of academia right now. Yeah. Whether I stay in academia is a very big question right now.
Yeah.
Because, while I still have a job and I did get promoted, I have been totally marginalized. I'm still shunned by 100 colleagues. I was moved from my office to the Russian department. put in a gulag office of my own. Basically, I've been exported to Siberia, in effect, on campus. Nobody speaks to me. It's not fun. It's not fun.
No. I looked at Camille Paglia as kind of a hero in this regard. She just went to the Philadelphia School of the College of the Arts or something. She said
it doesn't matter. It's not it's not a R1 university, so nobody bothers with her because those people around her probably don't know what the hell she's about anyway.
Exactly. So she writes all her stuff and she says, "Screw you, Yale. Screw you, Ivy League." And
I love it. I mean, I would be glad to take a job at, say, Grove City College or Hillsdale, even Liberty University, where there'd be more liberty than there is in, at NYU.
And Camille Paglia has always said that, so she's there dealing with real working class students there, unlike, in Harvard where they talk about all this stuff. And those students don't care about all this,
No, they don't. I made this point. In fact, I made this point in a recent podcast or discussion, where it's the students in real beleaguered conditions, people in real beleaguered economic and socioeconomic conditions, are not social justice ideologues. First of all, they don't have time for it. Second of all, they're not privy to this privilege. It's a privileged victimology, really, right?
To learn the language takes years.
It takes years to adopt this idiotic lexicon, right?
Exactly.
And to be able to spout it effectively, it's a privileged victimology that requires access to a certain cultural cachet or cultural capital, if you will.
Absolutely. Now I suppose if we want to give some recommendations, I suppose, to listeners, say
if you have students, if you have people in grade school in the United States, I would be so wary of what's going on there. Okay. I don't know what to say, except that I would be all over every handout that the student brings home, looking for signs that this is going on, a social justice indoctrination.
Oh, yeah, and homosexual indoctrination. I mean,
and transgenderism.
Yeah,
big time. They're taking students. They're bringing transgender speakers into kindergarten classes now to talk about that. And if you hear your child talking about their friend so and so had a transition party, this means that they're the transgender ideology, which is not just a natural thing for people who are trapped in a man's or woman's body or boy's or girl's body. This is a sweeping cultural fanaticism. How could it be that we had all these people now and we didn't have any of them before?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know you can't really talk about your lawsuit, but what I just want to ask about it in the sense that, your experience with it, is it something that is that a course of action that you think could be taken up by others, like if they're victimized or, by this whole...
It's a very difficult road to toe. And technically, I should say that there's no lawsuit on the table with NYU anymore. However, that doesn't mean that the effect of the suit and the whole situation has passed. And in fact, some circumstances have evolved such that I'm in a better position now than I was when the lawsuit was on the table.
Okay.
But I can't say any more about it except to say you have to be if you're being victimized, you must become publicly noticed immediately or they'll just disappear you. It's very easy for them to get rid of people. And you'll have no voice once you're out. You'll just be a disgruntled ex-employee. That's a big difference from that and a critic who's on the inside. So you can't allow them to make you go away. That's what they tried to do to me. And luckily I got called by the New York Post the very day they were trying to start it. And my story became public instantly.
That's...
You cannot hide. You cannot hide. Hiding is death.
And that's what they want you to do.
They want you to hide. Don't apologize, of course. Vox Day said this long ago. You don't apologize ever, because then it's blood in the water, and the sharks will be invited over for the rest of the feast. You never, try to negotiate with them. Don't use their language. Refuse their vocabulary. I often say, I don't speak SJW, period.
Exactly.
And learn. Educate yourself about where this has come from. And if I may say so, a good place to start might be my book, Springtime for Snowflakes, which goes into the history of where this social justice movement's ideas are derived from.
I want to just ask you about your next book, but before that, just advice for young men who would, be of university age. What do you think they should do in your opinion? Like with your son, like what did he?
Very careful about where they go. First of all, I would seek a place where there's some real liberty of conscience and expression, and that's likely a more conservative place, strangely enough. So, as it turns out today, conservative universities are the places where you're going to have more freedom.
Yeah, exactly. It's really weird. But and what did your son do?
My son went to the London School of Music instead.
Oh, great.
And now he is he's doing very well as a singer-songwriter. He's been on national TV, he's doing very well.
Excellent. Because, this is exactly what Camille Paglia says about, going to the School of the Arts or whatever. It's like trade schools. Like when you're focused on doing something. Yeah.
You're focused on doing something. You're not getting tied up into this morass. I wouldn't even be advocate most people taking the stance that I've taken, because you're in the battle. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be a cultural warrior. It's not for everybody. Let me just say that it is not for everybody. But somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to thank you for your intellectual work and your courage and your real world fight. Because I stand in solidarity with you, definitely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Kirk.
And I share your commitment to and your admiration for free thinking. I'm really glad we hooked up. Tell me about your next book. Brilliant title. I love it. The Gulag Archipelago. I love that.
Google Archipelago.
Sorry, the Google Archipelago. Sorry.
Right. It's called Google Archipelago, and the subtitle is The Digital Gulag and the Fate of Free Speech.
Yeah.
And it is, of course, based on the Solzhenitsyn novel, Gulag Archipelago.
That's right. I just thought it was a great play of words. I mix it up in my mind.
Yeah. I think it's, I don't know how this title's come to me. It came to me and I was like, I'm going with it. And it's about the Google Archipelago, which is not just Google, but the whole big tech digital.
Yeah.
I call it big digital, really. And their domination of expression and the ways in which they're going about it, and the connection between the culture and the ideology that they have on a company basis, in the company internally, and their algorithms and what they're enforcing exteriorly.
Yeah. When is it coming out?
June.
And who's the publisher?
New English Review Press, same publisher as Springtime, and I've loved them. Great people, and it's a small press, but we do big stuff.
Yeah, and one thing I found really interesting when I heard you speaking about it elsewhere is you're not just doing a theoretical critique here. You're talking to I can't remember the guy who got fired.
James Damore.
Yeah, James Damore, and you're looking into the algorithms used.
I actually worked in artificial intelligence when I was doing my PhD at Carnegie Mellon. I worked as a writer in an AI lab. So I learned how to read code.
Okay.
So I know how to read like algorithms. So I'll be looking at the actual code and seeing what they're saying.
That's brilliant. That's gonna make your book stand out and be a must read, because a lot of people won't be able to look at all that stuff.
They're not. A lot of people can't. So I'm a very thorough scholar, and I like to get down to the real stuff. So you have to actually know what you're talking about. You can just say things generally and make commentaries without knowing what's really happening. So
Yeah.
if you read the code, you can see exactly what they're doing, what the code is actually up to. So doing that and connecting it to ideology, code, algorithmic ideology, I'm calling it.
Yeah.
And then also, the way it's happening and, the way it's rolling out, not just in the United States, but the possible collaboration of China, what Google is doing in Indonesia, and the connection of all that to leftism. I mean, the thing that I've been trying to understand for 2 years is why has corporate America, especially, big tech, but now I think most corporate America, why has it become leftist?
Yeah.
In effect, why have they adopted a leftist ideology?
Do you have an answer?
Yes.
Tell me. If you can. I don't know.
I can give it to you in just a few words.
Sure.
But I can't expound on it because I'm going to save that for the book.
Sure.
It supports globalism.
Right. Yes. You know what? Yes, because in my mind, I came to the conclusion that liberalism and imperialism. Liberalism is an ideology of imperialism.
Yeah.
You can only be a free-floating individual in a massive space. You can only have this sort of free flow of capital, people, and things in a place that is under one government, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that's an excellent.
And one of the things I'm also uncovering is the connection of neoliberalism, which is the bogey of the left, the horrid economic ideology. Well, guess what? It has roots in socialism, not just capitalism.
Yeah.
So I'm exposing that. So that explains a little bit about why these corporations actually are trying to establish socialism in which they can maintain a free market foothold.
Yeah.
Very curious.
Yeah. Very, very curious. I look forward to it. There's I know you said you want to write the definitive book on this political moment, and I think you have some. I'm
trying. Yeah, this probably will just have parts of it. Maybe it'll be, the collection of them all. But then there might be one where I finally just get the whole thing in one place.
That's great. Well, I mean, we'll come to the end of this podcast, but I certainly want to continue our discussion even off out of here.
Off the video, yes.
Yeah.
It's great to talk to you, Kirk. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great, and thanks for your time. Take care, and as I said, I stand with you. This is a cause. This is a cause.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.